Welcome back to Comic Crackle. I'm your host and Grant Morrison's evil twin brother, Batman, the pulp icon that's been able to transcend the title of superhero, as well as bridging the gap between comic fans and people that touch grass. He's a character that can do anything and realistically fits within any genre. That can be attributed to his long publication history, as well as creators taking big swings with the character to redefine the expectation. From Bill Finger to Frank Miller, from Adam West to, you know the rest. Wait, why am I rhyming? We did the Etrigan video last time. What I mean to say is that Batman has been a mainstay within American pop culture. He's everywhere. Comics, merchandise, and some people would say too many adaptations within film and TV. It's me, I'm some people. The book that we're covering today attempted to remind the comics industry of the malleability of the character and to forewarn of the pitfalls of taking itself too seriously. Batman Arkham Asylum is a seminal work from Grant Morrison and Dave McKean that I've surprisingly never read. So for this Halloween episode, we're gonna fix that. But first, a word from our sponsor. Now, we can't talk about the story without reflecting on the history and seeing how the book came to be. You might be wondering why that is, and I'll tell you. It's because I said so. Now, I've spoken about DC's Vertigo imprint multiple times on the channel, and considering DC's announcement at New York Comic Con that they're bringing the line back, I thought it would be an opportune time to highlight the importance of one woman, Karen Berger. Without Berger, we wouldn't have had Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, Neil Gaiman, to revitalize Sandman, and Grant Morrison to be, well, Grant Morrison. She entered the comics industry at DC as an assistant editor under Paul Levitz. As time went on, she performed editorial duties, overseeing Levitz's Legion of Superheroes, but she was enamored with the horror stories told within comics. In 1984, she took over editorial duties from Swamp Thing co-creator Len Wein. From there, she recruited Alan Moore to tell a story that is beloved inside of the industry and beyond. The focus of this series, and stories that she would oversee in the future, would be to tell more complex and mature stories centering an older demographic. Now, if you're up on your comics history, or if you watched the last video, you would know something about the Comics Code Authority and how the establishment of this authority hamstrung comic publishers. Karen Berger made sure that the intended vision for Swamp Thing was not inhibited, so she made a push for them to stop submitting to CCA for approval. And this effectively lifted the restrictions previously put onto the comics industry. Now, not everybody took up that initiative, but stories were starting to slip through the cracks of the previously mandated restrictions. After the success of Swamp Thing, DC began to see the value of widening the demographics beyond just standard cape comics. This in turn led to the release of indie books that you probably have never even heard of, titled Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. I don't know, they're super underground. With successes becoming more frequent, DC gave Berger carte blanche to recruit creators outside of the normal pool of talent. Berger recounts this time in the afterword for Arkham Asylum by stating, "I had recently been charged by Jeanette Kahn to become DC's liaison with British freelance writers and artists. It was on my second trip to London to meet up with established creators and recruit new talent that I first met Grant Morrison and Dave McKean. Grant, a relatively new writer in British comics, flew down from Scotland and pitched a number of intriguing ideas. One of them was revitalizing Animal Man. The other was a psychological thriller featuring Batman at his most vulnerable mental state, trapped in a madhouse with his criminally insane enemies. A few hours earlier, Dave had been sitting silently by Neil Gaiman's side as Neil pitched Black Orchid and inquired about doing a new Sandman series. Then Dave opened his portfolio and showed me his work on Violent Cases, and I was totally blown away by his fresh approach to comics art and storytelling. Dave was fresh out of art school and his influences weren't comics oriented, but a mix of contemporary illustration and design, which was something entirely different from what any of us was used to seeing in traditional comics. Seeing the potential in both Morrison and McKean, she decided to guide their visions to publication. With Tim Burton's Batman on the way, Berger intended to capitalize on the new incoming audiences, at the same time being able to publish a book that subverted the connotation that Batman was specifically for children. Of course, this would pay off exponentially and catapult Morrison to the heights of comic stardom, but I shouldn't get ahead of myself. As I referenced earlier, Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns completely changed the industry, but there was a problem. Both series took an analytical approach to the medium, grounding superheroics through realism. I mean, Watchmen reads as a metatextual warning for the industry, saying that if the comics are over-reliant on realism, the endpoint to superheroes is fascism. Of course, and as per usual, the industry only saw the success of Watchmen and overlooked the message by Moore, so they decided to keep on publishing realistic comics. Grant Morrison speaks on the intent of Arkham Asylum by stating, "The intention was to create something that was more like a piece of music or an experimental film than a typical adventure comic book. I wanted to approach Batman from the point of view of the dreamlike, emotional, and irrational hemisphere, as a response to the very literal, realistic, left-brain treatment of the superheroes that was in vogue at the time in the wake of The Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, and others." They formed this book to be a counterpoint to the notion that realism is equating to quality. They did this by not shying away from maturity, but also allowing for the fantastical elements to shine through. It should be noted that this debate is still raging on today, from comics to adaptation. I mean, as a result of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, the inherent silliness has kind of been lost in adaptations going forward. The majority of adaptations since have acknowledged the source material, but couch it within dialogue that denigrates it. Batman in particular has been a victim of this specific sentiment, with all adaptations wanting to make it as realistic and gritty as possible. Guess what? That's not always the case. I mean, the most unrealistic aspect is he's a billionaire that's good. Morrison not only wanted to balance the perspective of what could be done within the framework of the industry, but also what could be accomplished with unconventional storytelling. Instead of the standard full script format, Morrison wrote the story utilizing aspects of film screenplays. This format allowed for Morrison to provide McKean with tone indications as well as evoking more of the horror within the series. They spoke on this decision by stating, "I imagined Arkham Asylum being done by someone like Brian Boland, and my vision was of it being ultra real to the point of being painful. But then when Dave McKean did it, it became something quite different because he wanted to make it more abstract." And I think that in a lot of ways, the ways we both approached it clashed in the middle. I think it would have been easier for people to deal with if it had been more concrete. Personally, after reading the story for the first time, I immediately wanted to read their script and see how this affected the collaborative process. The script is littered with notes to showcase how the story operates on a mechanical level, but also providing McKean the leeway to depict the story however he saw fit, allowing for overindulgence in depictions of these characters to evoke this tone that's almost tangible. When discussing the formulation of the series, Morrison attributes its inception to Len Wein's entry of Arkham Asylum within the pages of DC's Who's Who. They found the story of Amadeus Arkham to be fascinating, as he was the founder of the hospital whose family was murdered and descended into madness. With little additional insight, Morrison began to formulate this spiral into a story that would use Amadeus's mental status to be reflective of not only the inmates, but those that trap them within the madhouse. The story begins with Batman being called to speak with Commissioner Gordon. Gordon tells Batman that the inmates have taken over Arkham and are holding the staff prisoner. Joker demands to speak to Batman and starts luring him towards the asylum. Because it's a Batman comic, of course he takes up the metaphorical call to adventure. Once he arrives, he's greeted by Joker, offering offering for Batman to enter the real world by joining the inmates at the asylum. It's then revealed that the staff is not truly taken prisoner, but are staying within Arkham, either because they feel honor-bound due to their professions, or because they wouldn't allow for the asylum to remain overtaken by madmen. Batman's perspective leads him to individually take down each member of his rogues gallery, restoring some semblance of peace to the asylum. At the same time, the story depicts Amadeus Arkham's descent into madness. The parallels between Amadeus and Batman are reflected throughout the story. It depicts Arkham to be this all-consuming force where madness reigns. As each of the rogues are taken down by Batman, his mental and physical fortitude is challenged, with his progress further within the asylum seemingly correlating to his descent into madness. Towards the end of the story, Batman is able to overcome these Herculean tasks and provide peace, or some semblance of it, back to Arkham. If you're familiar with the Arkham Asylum video games, this story might sound similar, but I'll tell you now, I have no idea if the people over at Rocksteady have even cracked open the book, let alone read the summary on the back. What I mean by this is that Morrison and McKean sought out to tell a story that was not steeped in realism and avoided the trappings of telling another archetypical superhero story. And really, this adaptation is not doing it justice. Suffice to say, there's no Joker hopped up on Venom as the final boss battle. Although, if it was done within the style of Dave McKean's art, I wouldn't reject the idea outright. Okay, now that I've laid the groundwork for the book, we can move forward into analyzing the book and the messages that are portrayed either outright or subtextual. A minute ago, I referenced Herculean tasks, and that's not actually accurate. Although Morrison wouldn't be averse to this narrative structure, I mean, just look at All-Star Superman. However, this story provides our favorite flying rodent man with a new set of tasks. Okay. Don't shoot the messenger, but Morrison is correlating Batman's journey in this book to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Hey, I'm just saying, they even put that in the script. Don't blame me. I swear, this has evidence. And I'm not just trying to regurgitate the project that I did for my religion class in college, where I correlated the Dark Knight through the lens of a Christian allegory. I got an A on that, by the way. Humble brag. Before the story even begins, we are shown nails laid on a table, with a leather-bound booklet with the lettering clearly displaying the Passion Play. Within the story, the trials that Batman is subjected to reflect the same of Jesus, leading to his death and rebirth. Two of the largest and clearest indications are as follows. When attempting to steady himself in the aftermath of being infected with Scarecrow's fear toxin, Batman stabs himself through the hand and outright exclaims, Jesus. Obviously, this is a visual homage to Jesus' crucifixion being impaled through the hands, but also it hits the metaphorical nail on the head with him exclaiming Jesus. They're telling you what they're referencing. The other is when the assertion is made that Batman is equally responsible for the madness plaguing Arkham, as he is the embodiment of the bat, the physical representation of the carrier responsible for the spreading of madness, akin to the historical spread of the Black Death by rats. In response, he replies, I am just a man. And this is a paraphrased quote from Jesus when faced with his crucifixion, stating, I am only a man myself. Other details mirroring this analysis of the series is showing Batman and Amadeus fighting their own respective Satan. It depicts Amadeus to battle the plague that led to his mother's mental decline and in turn leading to his own. Talk about mommy issues, am I right, fellas? Concurrently, Batman takes on Killer Croc's brutal attack. Why Killer Croc? It's because the narration from Amadeus describes Satan to be taking the form of a dragon, like within most other depictions. And with Batman only having one reptile man in his rogues gallery, he kind of fits the bill. Speaking of mommy issues, the running motif showcases the characters and their relationships with their mothers as a running through line. From Amadeus's aforementioned witnessing of his mother's mental decline to recontextualizing the murder of the Waynes. I mean, honestly, it wouldn't be a seminal Batman book if we didn't see those pearls fall for the upteenth time. The motif continues with references to Disney's Bambi, as well as Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, with both depicting the trajectories of a character losing their mother, and showing how the breaking of this bond can be a deeper loss for a child. Seemingly, Morrison and McKean are trying to depict this relationship through a psychological lens, correlating the impacts of loss, especially figures that are seen as nurturing, to be a deeper loss for children. Moving on from sad boys into the topic of mad men, there needs to be a focus on how madness is depicted within the series, for not only the inmates, but Arkham itself. Morrison stated within the notes for the series that they wanted to utilize Arkham Asylum to symbolize a reflection of the mind, structuring the architecture to be able to provide for the narrative to explore the inner crevices of the asylum, while simultaneously reflecting that exploration within the psyche of Batman. As stated previously, the further Batman goes within the asylum, the further he descends into madness. This is explored as early as his entrance into the asylum, being presented with a Rorschach test, which he believes to resemble a bat. It's expanded on pages later with one of the psychologists performing a word association test with Batman, only for those words to all relate back to the moment of witnessing his parents' murder. One of my favorite aspects of the series is showcasing the treatment, or lack thereof, for the inmates of Arkham. A psychologist relays to Batman a theory that the Joker is not able to be treated because they are not even sure if Joker can be classified for insanity. They go on to posit that there's a possibility that the Joker's condition is an advancement of human perception, and Joker might have a higher state of consciousness, forcing him to display as a deviant to us, but to him, he's the only sane one. I know, that kind of sounds like something the smelliest man alive would say as he walks into a hot topic, but it came from this. The therapist also posits that Joker's extreme fluctuations in personality are a result of him having to rebuild his consciousness on a daily basis. Now, doesn't that sound more compelling than whatever the hell 3 Jokers was doing? Thanks, Jeff. Moving on, the psychologist shows the treatment provided for Two-Face. When previously reliant on a coin to carry out the will of the dual personalities, in Arkham, he's worked through this by expanding the possibility through the use of die, and later with tarot cards. At first being dependent on the coin, reflecting odds of 50%, then die with odds of 1 in 9, and now the tarot card deck being 78 cards. The assumption is to alter his mind's perception of choice being black and white and introducing shades of gray. It's explained with more possibilities that Two-Face would be able to work up to handling complex and nuanced decisions similar to those of the sane person's mind. Batman immediately notes that while in theory it's plausible, in application it's rendered dent with the inability of decision making, leading Harvey to be paralyzed by this reliance and soiling himself while attempting to consult the deck of cards. Man, somebody should have introduced this to Steve Ditko so he wasn't such a simp for Ayn Rand. As Batman begins his quest through Arkham, we see the various members of the Rogues Gallery and how they're reinvented for the series. Clayface is depicted to be weak and decaying, which Morrison noted that Basil is a metaphorical representation of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, showing how society responded to those that were sick and treated as alien. The Mad Hatter is shown to be, well, the Mad Hatter that we expect, lamenting to Batman and thus the reader of Morrison's story, however through Lewis Carroll adjacent prose. Hatter asserts that Arkham is like a head, one that dreams its inmates into being, and maybe it's Batman's. That's the point. Even Morrison's annotations state, "The Mad Hatter obligingly explains the book for anyone who hasn't figured it out yet." The assertion through the narrative is that insanity breeds insanity, that the inmates reflect Batman's psyche, and without him, they wouldn't exist. It's a remix of the ideas presented within The Dark Knight Returns, with Joker only returning when Batman begins operating once again. Morrison expands on this idea by positing through a metatextual and subtext perspective that Batman is reliant on insanity, and his presence breeds it to expand. As Batman reaches the endpoint of his journey, obtaining the absolution within the depths of Arkham, Joker stops him from leaving. He asserts that Batman belongs with the inmates, and that Batman denying his insanity is denying himself. Batman suggests that Two-Face should be the one with the power to make the decision of Batman's ability to leave, offering Two-Face his iconic silver coin, undoing the fracturing done within the asylum, and leaving the decision up to chance while also devoid of nuance. After flipping the coin, Two-Face says that the coin indicated Batman is able to leave. However, it's revealed that Dent is lying. This displays Harvey's seeming restoration of the ability to decide, while also showing that Harvey believes Batman is worth more than to join the inmates. Morrison's annotations reflect on this decision by stating, Harvey Dent transcends his role here and steps out of the game, ending it with an act of defiant compassion. The Joker's role as trickster/guide through the underworld is no more apparent than here, where he seems happy to let Batman go. The Joker's work is done. He's broken and remade his old enemy. In the reversal reality of the Feast of Fools, it's the arch-villain who does the most good, while the hero is ineffective and lost until the conclusion. This seemed a much richer, more satisfying, and more adult way to consider the Batman/Joker dynamic. After making the decision, Harvey smacks down a house of cards made from the deck of tarot. In my reading, I feel like it's a metaphor for not only Batman's psyche throughout the series, but everyone's. It's a house of cards. They're stable for a time, but with enough effort, it's quickly demolished. It also has to be stated that there's an overt exploration in sexuality and expression throughout the series, and tying it back to the psychology of the characters. While Batman is shown to be reclusive and placing distinct barriers between himself and the inmates, Joker is utilized as a full expression towards homoeroticism. Joker is consistently referring to Batman with pet names or ones of adoration shared between lovers, while Batman is shown to have repressed emotions towards sexuality and expression. Morrison is seemingly linking sexual expression to insanity, and it's to be inferred that Batman's caginess or inability to showcase himself is a repression, and thus that he's not comfortable within his sexuality. While at the same time, Joker is depicted to be comfortable in both his sexuality and expression. While I do understand that the book was written and released in 1989, and this kind of utilization is trying to show a sympathetic lens towards the queer community, I feel like it could be read that queerness is equal to insanity. I know that's not how Morrison feels, but it's how the story reads. While it is easy to be a commentator on comics and just talk about the plot, I'm not like other girls. Dave McKean's artistic decisions and the collaborative process between him and Morrison sell the story on a level that I don't think would be captured with another artist. The art is able to convey this tone, but it's also able to break form and showcase this madness outside of just the narrative. Dave McKean is consistent in the way that he's able to depict the dueling scenes between Amadeus Arkham and Batman, with Amadeus Arkham's narrative playing out over panels of varying sizes and being disjointed, while the depiction of Batman's perspective is usually incorporating the standard panel layouts of 9-panel grids and similar formats. As we progress in the story, in tandem to Batman's progression through Arkham, the further he descends into madness, and the more the panel layouts begin to reflect that of Amadeus Arkham's perspective. Moreover, the utilization of coloring is a major aspect of the visual storytelling depicted within the series. In the beginning, when Batman is speaking to Commissioner Gordon, the rendering of this scene is in black and white, equating this with sanity or the realism of the actual world. It's not until Batman arrives at Arkham when the artistic decision from Batman's perspective begins to skew towards evocative and expressive rendering. Like most of the other work from Grant Morrison, the book serves as a dense deconstruction of the character, the industry, and humanity. But the message is able to be depicted within our modern mythology by way of using superheroes. Outside of it being Halloween, the true reason that I wanted to cover this book is because a lot of the time people treat it as Batman in a haunted house, which I feel like it's underserving the narrative. While the imagery stands out and evokes this level of horror, I feel like a lot of readers are overlooking the messages put by McKean and Morrison. Anyways, that's going to be enough out of me. If you like videos similar to this, go ahead and click the playlist that's going to be on the right. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to go read some comics. Or else.